Socrates, a name every philosopher knows, yet a man who left behind not a single word of his own. We don't read Socrates, we read Plato, Xenophon, Aristophanes, his students, his critics, his enemies. Was he really a wise teacher, a stubborn troublemaker, or a comic fool? We may never know. What we do know is that his presence changed Athens forever. He walked the streets barefoot, questioning everyone, politicians, craftsmen, poets, tearing apart their beliefs until nothing was left but the truth, or the realization that they knew nothing. That was his power, not to give answers, but to strip away illusions. Some saw him as the wisest man in Athens, others as its most dangerous. One day, a friend of Socrates asked the Oracle of Delphi a question. Was anyone wiser than him? The oracle replied that no man was wiser. For Socrates, this was a riddle. He believed he had no wisdom at all. To test the prophecy, he began questioning everyone: the politicians who thought themselves clever, the poets who claimed inspiration, the craftsmen who prided themselves on skill. Everywhere he went, he exposed ignorance disguised as knowledge. In doing so, he understood the oracle's meaning. His wisdom was not in knowing everything, but in knowing how little he truly knew. Athens was not ready for such a lesson.
In the bustling streets of Athens, Socrates became known as the Gadfly. Like an insect that bites and stings, he disturbed the powerful and the proud. He stopped strangers in the marketplace, asking questions that seemed simple, but always cut deep. What is justice? What is courage? What is virtue? His questions stripped away pretenses until even the most confident men stood speechless. To some, he was a public nuisance. To others, a guide who forced them to think for themselves. But in a city that valued reputation and pride, being exposed in public felt like an attack. And slowly, the Gadfly began to gather enemies.
Socrates was no ordinary philosopher. He had lived as a soldier, fighting bravely in 3 wars. In battle, he stood firm while others fled, once saving the life of the young Alcibiades. Yet off the battlefield, he was known for his strange appearance. Short, barefoot, with bulging eyes and a crooked nose, he looked more like a beggar than a sage. But behind that awkward figure was a mind that fascinated everyone who spoke with him. He came from humble roots. His father was a stonemason, her mother a midwife. Socrates compared his own role to hers, helping people give birth to ideas. These hidden parts of his life show a man who was not above anyone, but who lived among them: soldier, citizen, teacher, and questioner. As his fame grew, so did resentment. Politicians saw him as a threat, exposed in front of the people they ruled. Poets mocked him in plays, portraying him as a fool who corrupted the youth. Some of his students did little to help his reputation. Alcibiades, once his companion, became a notorious traitor who betrayed Athens. Others who admired Socrates turned against democracy itself, leading many to suspect that his teachings planted the seeds of rebellion. To the Athenians, this wandering thinker who gave nothing to the city but endless questions began to look less like a philosopher and more like a danger. And in the end, enemies would be the ones to decide his fate. In 399 BCE, Socrates was brought to trial before the people of Athens. The charges were serious: corrupting the youth and refusing to honor the city's gods. The trial was less about crimes and more about fear. Athens had recently survived war, betrayal, and tyranny.
In this fragile moment, Socrates, with his endless questioning and dangerous students, became a convenient scapegoat. He stood before hundreds of jurors, unshaken. Instead of begging for mercy, he defended his life's work, claiming he had only sought to guide Athens toward truth and virtue. But the city did not want his truth. It wanted silence.
The jury voted, and the verdict was guilty. The punishment was death. Socrates could have escaped. His friends begged him to flee the city, to live in exile. But he refused. He believed that to run would betray the very laws he had spent his life defending. So he accepted his fate calmly. Surrounded by his students, he lifted the cup of poison hemlock and drank. As the poison spread through his body, he spoke of the soul's journey after death. His last moments were not of fear, but of quiet certainty. The man who had spent his life questioning now faced the final question with peace.
Socrates never claimed to have all the answers. His wisdom was in the questions. He taught that virtue mattered more than wealth or power, that a good life was one guided by the care of the soul. He challenged people to seek truth within themselves rather than follow tradition blindly. Many of his ideas survive only through the writings of his students. Plato turned his lessons into dialogues, shaping entire schools of philosophy. Others remembered him differently, as a stubborn critic, a comic figure, or a dangerous agitator. But beneath it all, his teaching was simple. The unexamined life is not worth living. And it was this belief that guided him, even to death. Socrates became larger than life, surrounded by stories that blurred fact and legend. Some said he could drink more wine than anyone without ever losing control. Others spoke of a strange inner voice, a mysterious sign he claimed warned him whenever he was about to make the wrong choice. To his followers, it was divine. To his enemies, madness. There were tales of his iron discipline, standing barefoot in the snow, lost in thought for hours, unmoved by cold or hunger. These myths made him seem almost otherworldly, part man, part riddle, a figure who lived by different rules than the rest of Athens.
Though he left no writings of his own, the words of Socrates have lived for centuries through those who remembered him. His lessons became the foundations of philosophy. Wisdom begins with admitting ignorance, virtue is the highest good, and truth is worth more than life itself. Generations have repeated his sayings, turning them into guiding lights for seekers of knowledge. His voice echoes across time, reminding us that questions can be more powerful than answers, and that a single life of inquiry can change the world forever.
Before he was a philosopher in the marketplace, Socrates was a soldier on the battlefield. He fought in 3 major wars for Athens, always in the thick of danger. At Potidaea, he saved the young Alcibiades, carrying him to safety through chaos and blood. In another battle, he stood firm while others fled, calm and fearless under attack. His courage was so remarkable that fellow soldiers said he seemed untouched by fear, as if death itself could not reach him. The same man who later questioned the meaning of justice and virtue had already proven them in war. Socrates did not look like a hero or a sage. Ancient writers described him as ugly, short, stout, barefoot, with bulging eyes and a snub nose. In the streets of Athens, he looked more like a beggar than a teacher. Yet his strange appearance only made him more memorable. People laughed at him, but they couldn't ignore him. His presence drew curiosity, and his words held them captive. He proved that wisdom and greatness did not need noble looks or fine clothing. His power was not in appearance, but in the force of his mind.
Socrates lived in a world where women had little voice, yet he often spoke of learning from them. He claimed one of his greatest teachers was Diotima, a mysterious priestess who taught him about love, not as desire, but as a path toward truth and beauty. At home, he was married to Xanthippe, remembered for her fiery temper. Stories say she would scold him endlessly, even throwing water over his head after arguments. Socrates only laughed, saying such storms were natural after thunder. These stories reveal another side of him, a man who listened, who argued, who lived his philosophy not just in public, but in the daily struggles of life.
Socrates was not born into wealth or nobility. His father was a stonemason, his mother a midwife. From them, he inherited both strength and symbolism. He compared his philosophy to the work of his mother. Just as a midwife helps bring forth life, Socrates believed his role was to help others give birth to ideas. He claimed he had no wisdom of his own, only the ability to draw it out of others through questioning. This humble origin set him apart from the polished sophists and aristocrats of Athens. He was a man of the people, shaped by ordinary roots, yet destined to challenge the greatest minds of his city.
When the Oracle of Delphi declared that no man was wiser than Socrates, it shocked him. He believed he had no wisdom at all. To test the oracle, he began questioning those who claimed to know, the politicians, the poets, the craftsmen. Each time, he uncovered the same truth. They spoke with confidence, but their knowledge was shallow. Socrates realized the oracle's message. His wisdom was not in knowing everything, but in knowing that he knew nothing. It was a riddle with a deeper meaning, that true wisdom begins with humility.
One of the most dramatic figures around Socrates was Alcibiades, a brilliant, ambitious, and dangerously reckless young man. Handsome and charming, he had the city of Athens at his feet. But Alcibiades was also unpredictable, switching loyalties between Athens, Sparta, and even Persia. Despite his flaws, he admired Socrates deeply. In battle, Alcibiades once claimed that Socrates saved his life. Yet Socrates, in turn, tried to save Alcibiades from his own arrogance. Their bond showed the tension between philosophy and ambition, wisdom trying to guide desire, but desire often proving too wild to control.
Socrates was not only a thinker, he was also a soldier. He fought bravely in the Peloponnesian War, serving Athens on the battlefield. Stories tell of his endurance. He would march barefoot in winter, endure hunger without complaint, and remain calm while others panicked. At Potidaea, he stood firm when others fled. At Delium, he retreated slowly, facing the enemy with steady eyes, protecting those around him. This was no ivory tower philosopher. Socrates lived his courage. He showed that philosophy was not just words, but a way of life tested in danger.
Socrates called himself a gadfly, the small insect that bites and irritates a lazy horse. Athens, he said, was that horse, and he was sent by the gods to sting it into wakefulness. Through endless questions, he exposed contradictions, forcing people to think about justice, virtue, and truth. Many admired him, but many more grew frustrated. Powerful men saw him as a threat, an annoyance that disturbed their comfort. Yet Socrates refused to stop. He believed that a life without examination was not worth living. Better to be a gadfly and awaken the city than to remain silent in ignorance.
In 399 BCE, Athens put Socrates on trial. The charges? Corrupting the youth and impiety, not believing in the city's gods. But beneath the surface, it was political. Athens was wounded after war and tyranny, and many blamed Socrates for questioning tradition and inspiring dangerous students like Alcibiades. At his trial, he spoke with fearless honesty. He refused to flatter the jury or beg for mercy. Instead, he defended his mission as a gift from the gods, to challenge, to question, to awaken. The court found him guilty. By a narrow margin, Athens condemned its greatest thinker to death.
After the verdict, Socrates' friends urged him to escape. They had bribed guards, prepared a safe route. Freedom was within reach. But Socrates refused. He argued that fleeing would betray his own principles. All his life, he had taught respect for law and justice. To run now would make his words meaningless. So he chose to stay. In prison, he spent his last days in discussion, calm and unshaken. He spoke of the soul, of virtue, of what it means to live rightly. Even as death approached, he remained the teacher, never breaking his role.
The day came for Socrates to drink the poison. His friends gathered, weeping, but he remained composed. The jailer handed him the cup of hemlock. Socrates took it without fear, lifted it to his lips, and drank. He walked calmly until his legs grew heavy. Slowly the poison spread upward. His last words were strange and simple. He asked that a rooster be sacrificed to Asclepius, the god of healing. To him, death was not an end, but a cure, freedom from the illness of life. And so, with quiet dignity, Socrates left the world, leaving behind a legacy that would shape philosophy forever.
Though Socrates wrote nothing himself, his spirit lived on through his students. Plato turned his teacher's words into dialogues that shaped philosophy for centuries. Xenophon recorded his memories of Socrates as a man of character and discipline. Even those who opposed him could not erase his influence. His trial and death became a symbol of truth against power, a story retold in every age where free thought is threatened. From ancient Athens to modern classrooms, Socrates remains the gadfly, the voice that refuses to be silent, the reminder that questioning is the beginning of wisdom.
Socrates left no books, no written doctrine. All we have are echoes of his voice, words carried through his students and remembered by history. Yet those fragments are enough to guide humanity even today. He said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." For Socrates, a life spent without questioning, without seeking truth, was no life at all. To live blindly, following habit and tradition, was worse than death. He said, "True wisdom comes to each of us when we realize how little we understand about life, ourselves, and the world around us." These words stripped away pride, reminding us that learning begins with humility. He said, "I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think." Socrates never claimed to be a teacher in the usual sense. He believed wisdom was already inside us, waiting to be uncovered through questioning. His task was to act as a midwife of ideas, helping others give birth to their own truth. He said, "He is richest who is content with the least, for contentment is the wealth of nature."
a warning against endless desire, reminding us that happiness lies not in possessions, but in the soul. And he said, "Prefer knowledge to wealth, for the one is transitory, the other perpetual." In a world obsessed with power and riches, his words still strike like lightning. Wealth fades, but wisdom endures. Each of these sayings is more than a sentence. They are sparks, sparks that survived centuries, lighting the path of countless thinkers, scientists, and leaders who shaped our world. Even as Athens silenced him, his voice grew louder across history. And today, every time we question, every time we seek truth over comfort, Socrates speaks again.